Welcome to another episode of Bourbon and Rum. This is a podcast of two brothers from opposite ends of the spectrum. My name's Kent. I'm a rum drinker, and I'm from the left side of the aisle.
And I'm Kyle. I like bourbon, tend to be a little more conservative. Join us as we explore this experiment. Can two brothers from different sides of the political spectrum have a civil conversation and celebrate our differences?
What are you drinking?
Well, I am just drinking my standard E.H. Taylor, which I can find now. I think I drank this the other day. I can find it all the time now. I was gonna drink rum. I was on a work trip overseas this week, and they didn't have any good bourbon where I was at, but they had this rum. I drank this Ron Zacapa XO rum. I tried to find it at the liquor store. It's like, man, I would give up every bottle of bourbon I had for that stuff. It was awesome. But I wound up buying a bottle because somebody was like, well, this is kind of like it. And it's like, well, it's not. So I'm back to bourbon, right?
Well, cool. I am drinking rum. I've had the opportunity, usually I drink cheap rum because I live in a small town and I don't have the access to the frou-frou stuff like Kyle does. But I've been in a couple of major cities and I've been loading up the car. This is a bottle of Barcelo Imperial. This is a Dominican rum made in Dominican Republic. So if you've tracked with us, that's a Spanish-style rum, and it tends to be fairly light and smooth. And this one is really light and smooth. Just probably not as good as that XO Zacapa that you had, but it's pretty good. And I'm drinking actually a cocktail. There is a teaspoonful of falernum syrup in this, which kind of, it's like simple syrup with ginger and a bunch of herbs, and it's kind of like drinking an old fashioned.
Nice.
Today, there's a third glass at our table, and we'd like to introduce a guest today. We've got our brother-in-law, Kurt. And Kurt, what are you drinking today?
Well, hey, thanks for having me on, guys. I'm going to go a little more pedestrian. I am in Michigan, and I'm going to tout some of their local crafted beers. I have an Oberon, which is a summer wheat ale out of Bell's Brewery in Comstock. Most people around here are pretty familiar with it, and it's a limited time deal. Still could find it in the store for the next couple weeks. And then if things get really serious, I've got some Two Hearted Ale. So thanks for having me on.
We got to talking. We've been talking for a while about, just guests in general. And we talked to Kurt quite a bit, and we thought, man, this would be a good fit. And then, as we get into the topic this week, I think it's helpful to bring him into the picture because he, Kent's, the left hand of the spectrum. I tend to be the right. We kind of bounce around a bit, but I think Kurt is a little more of an independent. He's kind of in the middle and
kind of the wild card.
And based on the events this week, I think we wanted to kind of dig into that a little bit, dig into the spectrum of beliefs and how we can all coexist without this crazy violence that we saw this week.
Yeah, agree. We, I think most of us, our thoughts and our media share have been really, really fixated on the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Honestly, it feels like 1968. I think that's the thing that comes to my mind. It just, it's a worrisome time. Well, Kurt, with you as a guest, maybe give us your take. How did you learn about this? What were your initial thoughts? What have your thoughts been as you've kind of processed about this assassination?
Well, thanks for giving me the floor early. I'll try not to dominate the conversation because I'm not as informed as you guys, I'm certain. As far as where I come from, I think Kyle's, it's fair to say I'm probably in between you guys. Been a libertarian most of my life. So I'm not exactly sure where I stand. It's probably leaning a little more right these days, but still, I try to keep an open mind. I have 3 kids, and everybody's got a little bit different views, and my wife has a little bit different views. I am a Christian, so I try to look at that through that lens as well. And so I try to just kind of judge the political things of the day through all those different lenses without getting bogged down into Twitter and a lot of the onslaught of media. So I was concerned, like everybody else was, because it seems like there's a justification in violence that I haven't seen manifested as much until the last few years. Yeah, we have had times when that was definitely more prevalent, but I'm concerned that we're on a precipice of even more of that, because I don't see the temperature. The temperature was rising, and without going on too long, I would say the thing that really moved me to contact you guys was Bernie Sanders' address to the country in response to this. And it was ahead of a lot of the rhetoric that could have been very damaging. And I think he cut a lot of it off. And I really give him a ton of credit for that. And I hate to say I'm shocked a little bit by how balanced it was, but it was excellent. And it put the blame where it belonged and covered both sides of the spectrum. Everything's political with these guys, but so, like he thought about what he was going to say and what he might be doing in the next few years and all that stuff. But your choice of words matters, and his choice of words, I couldn't disagree with a thing. And I thought it was one of the most valuable things that I've seen a public figure do to manage the temperature lately. And as much as I tend to agree with certain policy prescriptions of our current president, mostly the foreign policy stuff, not a fan of everything he does, but I do think his statements, although the words mattered, his actions have not lowered the temperature. Or his rhetoric in the past has contributed to the temperature rising, and he sets the tone. And so those would be my 2 big takeaways: is that it was a tragic event. I'm worried, about where we're at, but our political leaders matter. And I saw a contrast of 2 of them a few days ago, and it was very interesting to me. And I guess I was optimistic and pessimistic at the same time. And I thought this was a great opportunity to hear what you guys had to say.
Kyle, what about you?
No, I agree. I watched Bernie's response to, he essentially talked about, hey, Charlie was a really good communicator, and he's talking about his faith, and he's talking about his beliefs, and he's like, I disagree with him on much of what he says, but
Everything.
well, I mean, he
Yeah.
just said, he said that, I disagree with about everything he says, but
Right.
like, he's got a right to say it. And, this, and, he kind of cited some of the other political violence that's happened over the last couple of years. And, just this idea that, you can just go out and kill somebody that doesn't like your views. What's crazy to me is you hear some of these reactions, and some of the stuff on social media, and people are like, oh, he deserved this and blah blah blah. One thing I found really just an odd thing is, I heard multiple people say, like, he's a fascist. People throw around this term fascist. Well, you're a fascist, and it's like shooting somebody to silence them for their beliefs. I don't know that there's a more fascist action than that.
Right.
Completely agree. Yeah. Yeah. So for me, I'm going to admit that I did not have a great perception of Charlie Kirk before this happened. And candidly, as more has come out about him, it's almost made me reconsider or think that I ought to be more, I ought to have taken a deeper look. I will say categorically what I said the minute that it happened, and I thought this was, not that anybody follows me on Facebook, but I thought it was really important to say unequivocally, there's no place for political violence in our country. It can't happen. But I wasn't a fan of him per se, and I think in hindsight, I'm realizing that my media, and by that I mean the slice of the universe that comes to me, definitely cherry picked some of the more inflammatory things that he'd said, and so that colored my opinion for him. Again, but immediately when you see or hear of this, it's like, wow, this is in a different realm, right? Like there's disagreeing about policy, and that's people that I really don't like, and I don't like what they say. But like we're not in the shoot people kind of thing. I guess I would. I find it a little bit interesting. I don't want to go on a tangent yet, but I'll start. Ordinarily, and it happens often enough that we have ordinarilies for this. When somebody shoots up a school or assassinated a politician in Minnesota in June, that people kind of discount things and say, well, that person was crazy, right? Like it was all about mental illness and so forth. That's exactly what I see with this person so far. And yet, at least my narrow slice of things seems to be, well, people are taking this really seriously. Like, this is a legitimate assassination. And I just didn't get that read when the legislator in Minnesota was shot. Maybe I'm interested in your takes on that. Is it that this is just that high profile a leader?
Yeah, I
I don't
didn't
see
get
a lot that's
anybody in.
sensible about the person.
Well, but I think the people that I guess I'm trying to understand your perspective. I mean, yeah, I've seen a lot on social media about people. Well, he got what he deserved and all this nonsense. I did not see that with some of the other politicians like some of these other folks. I haven't seen like people jumping out there like, oh, well, that person got what they deserve. Yeah, I just feel like there was. I mean, Charlie's social media presence was so ubiquitous that even if your feed is another side of the spectrum, you're probably seeing him pop in your feed all the time, and you've got an
Sure.
opinion.
Yeah. First of all, man, I've just got to say, I don't deny that there were probably some people who were blasé about this, but I mean, really, you think that's characteristic of this? That just kind of shocks me. Would you
No, I mean
describe that as
Uh,
characteristic of that?
yes,
I'm
I mean
afraid so.
my kids have been crying because the stuff they say. I mean, it's all over.
And if I may, I want to amplify what Kyle said, which is the right, for all their ills, they don't celebrate things like that as much as the left does. There seems to be, at the very least, an allowment of it that it's not condemned. And
I got to call that bullshit. Are there people? Of course there are, but I'm just not going to be. I am a card carrying liberal, and I'm not going to be painted like I'm soft on assassinations. Like that just doesn't make
No,
any sense.
no, I'm not saying that you are. I'm just, and you know, hey, Bernie Sanders, you're not going to find a more liberal guy, and like his response was inspiring.
dead
I'm just
on.
saying this individual was a figure that people either loved him immensely or they despised him. And there's a lot of negative stuff out there, but that may be because there is a bunch on both sides of this.
I think that's an
Well,
excellent point, is the polarization, like, and everybody's responsible because it's what sells, whether it's clicks or whatever. Like the political discourse has coarsened and gotten into 146 characters, because that's about everybody's attention span. And so in order for you to be impactful at all, you have to be polarizing. And so, yeah, like he was effective, but because of the environment, he created strong enemies as well as strong allies.
Well, I hear you on that. And insofar as this is a measure of polarization, no disagreement. I guess I'm saying that I really reject the notion that Democrats are more likely to be cool with assassination than Republicans. I think the reason that you've seen what you've seen, Kyle, which again, I believe it's out there. I will tell you that all my liberal friends, when we talk, we're not like, oh, that was great. That you're seeing that is probably more a barometer of his celebrity and widespread knowledge. I just can't sign on that Democrats are more prone to being okay with political violence.
Yeah, I don't know that I would, you know, I'm sure, you know,
Let me
I
let me
don't know
interrupt
that
you. Let
there's
me
a
ask
way
you
to
this.
prove that one way or the other. I guess all I was going down the path of was less about right versus left, but like the whole temperature thing, like how do you get people to stop hating each other to the point where they can talk if I don't know, it's like like the two groups are living in two separate universes.
Agree with that. Again, let me just state I'm not trying to, I don't disagree with that. I'm just saying, I bet it wouldn't take me more than 30 seconds of Googling to find people that were making jokes and memes about Nancy Pelosi's husband when he got hit in the head with the hammer.
I don't think that would be that easy. My sense is the volume of acceptance was different on those two things. Again, and I'm not going to claim to be, a person who tracks social media all the time, but that certainly doesn't seem to be what my slice is, of the universe is telling me. But I could be wrong.
Following the October 26 or October 22 hammer attack on Paul Pelosi, a wave of jokes, memes, and conspiracy theories spread online and were amplified by some right wing political figures and media outlets. Donald Trump sarcastically asked a crowd in California, "How's her husband doing, by the way? Anybody know?" I
All
mean,
right, I condemn that. I think that,
yeah,
and I think that's, hopefully we'll get to that too. That he as not just the commander, but he, as the head of state, should be a culture leader, and isn't doing a phenomenal job there for the other 50% that didn't vote for him.
yeah. Don't mean to spiral down on this. I think the obnoxious, ugly underbelly that you're seeing, I think is more a function of his visibility and celebrity than the fact that he happened to be on the right. I could be
Well,
wrong,
but
but that's what it
how
feels like.
how much of the ugliness that we see is also based on what I would characterize as the separate universe that you live in. How much is that?
It certainly could be. Again, I live in a pretty liberal universe, and I don't know anybody who was like blowing noisemakers. People were
Well,
shocked and horrified.
you're in. I would say that the left has created a coalition of a lot of interesting bedfellows since 2020, since 2008, and you're in an enclave of highly educated, pretty reasonable people. Good for you. An 18-year-old is not capable of that same discernment to know, that certain things should be condemned, just, even if somebody that you follow on Twitter agrees with it.
Yeah.
So, I think you're right. I'm glad that your coterie is all, in agreement that this is, unacceptable. I think Kyle and I would probably say the same about, folks that we tend to associate with. If somebody's some idiot part of your party, if you will, you got to live with them a little bit. But I do see a little bit more variability in the coalition you guys are trying to put together sometimes. I say you guys, I probably shouldn't do that because I agree with certain things, but it's a little bit more of a mixed bag sometimes, and it makes for interesting challenges.
You
Or
know,
great opportunities.
I,
Right.
and you know, we live in a pretty conservative place, I'll say, but like my daughter this week, she's at school and this whole thing came up, and she's pretty serious about her faith. And one of her friends, she's talking to one of her friends about it, and the friend was like, "Well, you know, I heard he's racist, so you know, he probably deserved it." You know, and it's like, okay, where does that kid, one, where does hear that the guy is racist? Well, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff all over social media that says, you know, he's fascist and racist, and you pick the label.
Ad hominem.
Like, I mean, I know the kids' parents that she's talking about. They're nice folks. They probably are thinking about this the same way we are. I guess I'm just saying, like, the level of one, there's a level of hatred out there, but there's also this, you know, you can say something about somebody and it doesn't have to be true, but it'll spread like wildfire. And in your own little circle, the thing can get ramped up and turned into a fever pitch. And if you really went back and were like, "Oh, what did the guy say that was racist?" I mean, you know,
May never even have existed. It's the
right.
telephone
But
game.
all it has to do is somebody has to say it. And the next thing you know,
Right.
that's part of the who you are. And
And it starts affecting people especially young people. It can influence them even though there's little basis in truth for it.
yeah,
And that is not left or right. It is just there's so much information out there. Kids are exposed to a bunch of BS and don't know how to filter it.
right.
And they're also, they're emotional beings, especially, at younger age. And some of the trigger words and things out there are very effective in scaring these kids or motivating them or whatever. And I think that's right. Like we're turning into a society that is motivated by emotions and hearsay and not facts and civil discourse, which was kind of the whole point of your podcast and which was the whole point of Bernie's statement. And so I think it's super crucial to, like talk about that, like either try to get back to that or like, where did we go wrong? Can we get back to it?
I agree, Kurt. I think it's a well said. And again, I just want to make sure that everybody's clear that I'm not sticking up for people that have said
No,
outrageous things.
No question. Nobody thinks that.
But it is not unique to the left. Your comment about the coalition is an interesting one. If we got time, that would be an interesting one to pursue. But I guess I will say so stipulated, right? We all live in bubbles. We've got this thing. Our kids are getting these, TikTok, by the way, which is the agency of the Chinese government and the devil in tandem.
Right.
But yeah, so we get these. So how do we fix it? And I'm gonna throw a posit on the table that if I look at this and as a liberal and say, yeah, you guys have got to work on this on your side, then we've already lost. The best way I can work on this is to work on myself, starting with me, and to control and to source my information well. I think that the responsibility starts with ourselves. And I think if you asked 100 people, you'd probably get at least an opening salvo from 80 of them. Like, well, those SOBs have got to change.
yeah, it's a lot of so here in Texas, a former English teacher is just threw his name in the hat to run in a primary against the other Democrat in the Texas primary. This guy named James Tallarico.
I've seen him.
Yeah, he was on Rogan. He's getting a lot of national popularity. He's well-educated guy. got a Harvard degree, and he's actually in seminary right now, and he's a liberal Democrat. I just say that like I don't necessarily like I heard his whole thing on Rogan, and I don't necessarily agree with everything he says. Some of it I certainly vehemently disagree, but very thoughtful guy. He's running on a couple things, but one of his contentions, and I've heard it from others on coincidentally on the right. Now it's interesting because his Tallarico's take he attributes it to billionaires. On the right, I hear it a lot because he attributes it to the ruling class. But whoever you attribute to, both sides have said this. He's like they, in his case, the billionaires, and others they say it's the ruling class. They want us to constantly be fighting against each other. They want us to identify by race, by gender, by whatever. They want all this strife because it benefits them. And I I think there's something there, but then I also wonder like is this to your point, Ken, if it's a more inward thing, is everything like we got to pin it on somebody else?
Right. Actually, pretty amazing message would be take back your local community, make the governors, answer to the governed, take back this country and like be involved in local politics, be involved in your local school, be involved in,
Kent,
all the way
Kent,
up.
run for office.
Right.
Well,
So no, I tend to agree with Kent that, it is should be more grassroots, and especially with kids and especially with managing social media, managing their information and stuff like that. But it's more than that. It's blame it on everybody else, and then you're free to basically be lazy and not take part in making your community better, your government better. And because there's always somebody beating you down, and if we could just get rid of those bums, it'll all be good. Well, you're the bums,
yeah.
you're the bums who aren't doing anything.
When I was years ago, I was a pastor, and one of my favorite things to say when issues would come up around faith and government, and people would talk about submit yourself to those in authority. There's some really interesting passage, especially in the New Testament, about the relationship with the government. But it seemed to surprise people when I would say, remember, we live in a representative democracy. You, Caesar, is you, right? Caesar is not some nameless force that you have no control over. Admittedly, my vote alone doesn't fix things. But in this country, we got to quit blaming they. To your point about, that they want to see us fight. Like, doesn't matter who your they is. You ask 8 people and you get 8 different definitions of they. It's the billionaires, it's the ruling class, it's the professional politicians, it's the Republicans, it's the Democrats, or whatever. But if there's a they in your description, you probably need to take a step back.
Amen. And both sides are very much in the finger pointing game right now, because neither have a coherent message. I mean, I think the right has a little better coherency right now, is like getting everybody in line together to try to move an agenda forward. For what that's worth, the left has always been very good at that in the last couple decades. But that's different than having a true message. So there is a fair amount of finger pointing on both sides, and it sucks because these impressionable young people who don't understand the nuances of the political battle think that they're the enemies, and that they're going to ruin our way of life, and that leads to things like this.
I've got a friend, lowercase f with quotation marks around it, on Facebook, who I think you're spot on with this, Kurt. And this is an example. And again, I'm not painting this as all Republicans by any means, but this is the kind of thing that you see. minutes, not hours, minutes after the news of Kirk's assassination was made public, I think the opening line of his screed on Facebook was, "Well, the Democrats have finally done it," and it went on to this whole thing. And I thought, I worry a lot about the after effects of this and how does this play out. And I'm going to tell you, and Kurt, you hinted on this, that, I mean, I think that's exactly how Trump described it, right? The Democrats killed him. And if that's the way that we go, you're sure not going to get to any of that introspection. How do we make things better? How do we listen to people on the other side? And I don't think it was a Republican that killed Melissa Hortman in Minnesota. I don't think it was. I actually think he was an independent or Democrat. But like anybody's trying to hang this on the Democrats killed Charlie Kirk, I like we're not off to a good start if that's the way we're going to lead.
No, we're not. I'm not trying to, by the way. I mean,
I didn't get that from you. No.
fair enough. I will say I have drifted more right because of the emotionalism of what I guess what I'll call the left. You know, Bill Maher, for example. I think that guy he's extremely intelligent, and I disagree with a ton of things he says, but he's relevant to something like this because he's a real big believer in free speech and also, classical liberalism. And, he said pretty vociferously, like, I'm right where I am, and the left moved out from under my feet. And so I've seen that a little bit. Now the right, I would say the right has moved a little more left lately, which is why I find myself migrating slightly that way, because I think they're trying to attract people who are more socially liberal. You might disagree, fair enough. I don't think the Christian conservative coalition is super strong. Let's put it that way. I don't think the NRA is as strong as it used to be.
True.
I think a lot of those heavy hitters have been marginalized, and we're reaching out. I say we. I've said that twice now. I'm not trying to like be deceitful, but I do think that I do have more concerns on the left, but I'm not going to say it's a they thing. I am really interested in seeing the right put together Trump while he's in power. I would really like him to lead the charge. And he's going to have to change a lot of things about his personality and leadership style, but he could, because he's a pragmatist and he's really old. And boy, wouldn't that be a really cool second, third, fourth act for him to like try to heal some wounds.
When you said third or fourth act, I swear I thought you were going to say third or fourth term, but I was going to throw up a little bit. Kyle, what are you thinking?
Well, I just was fact checking you a little bit, Kent. I got an inventory of Trump statements on the Kirk assassination. You're not completely off. He said radical left lunatics are responsible for the kind of environment that led to Kirk's killing. He said that it's a dark moment for America. Yeah, I think I don't know. I was just thinking about like, where does this go from here?
Mm-hmm.
I hope, more people could have dialogue like us. I feel like, that could people talk, but they're not. The downside is they're not, because people are addicted to the short messages they can lob online with no identity. They don't have to put their face out there on the right or the left. You can throw all kinds of bombshells at each other. And, if those people that behind these anonymous profiles on all these social media sites actually sat in a room together and have a dialogue and be like, you say some outlandish crap and have to defend it in person, looking at somebody else in the eye, it'd be a way different conversation. But like, how do we get to that? I mean, is the train too far past the station to get back to that point? And then it's, we talk about, I don't know, people talk about, okay, well, and then if people aren't going to be civil, okay, is this going to go down a worse path? And then it's going to be a civil war. And then it's like, okay, well, and we've talked about this before, like, well, what's a civil war? What's the dividing line? And
Right.
I think the problem is there's no dividing line. It's going to be neighbor against neighbor, house against house. It's people, did we just devolve into a place where people spin each other up so much online, and then you just have like the number of random acts of violence just start spiraling out of control? I mean, I'm not trying to sound doom and gloom, but like, what happens next?
So this is like a complete curveball, but I think it's related. So I think one of the things that we need is more visibility and surfacing to the fact that so much of this is completely manipulated. So, in a completely different context, I was watching a YouTube channel from a young kid yesterday, and it's kind of a just a goofy channel. He likes to do kind of like stunts and practical stuff. And so his stunt was he wanted to sneak into fancy car dealerships and private jet dealers, and he was going to try to pass himself off as a billionaire. So comical, right? The part that blew my mind was his preparation steps for this. First, he purchased an Instagram account with 1 million followers. Let that sink in for a minute.
You can do that.
For 2 grand. And then
Wow.
And then he went and spent, like, it was some number of money. Maybe it was another 2 grand. He had a post and he wanted 10,000 likes on that post. And he bought 10,000
Bots.
likes. And it showed him watching the screen and the likes are spinning on the thing that he bought. Like,
Wow.
if this kid is 22 years old and his YouTube profession is sneaking into country clubs, if that kid can figure that out for 2 grand to pop,
Yeah.
man,
Wow.
think about what we're up against here.
Well, and did the
Well,
government do this?
of
We're going to
course.
get a lot of likes on this episode. I'm just going to put that out there.
Well, I mean, the bot thing, sock puppets, all that stuff, like that's been around for damn near a decade. And like people still don't quite get it when they're looking at social media. They're still deceived.
Yeah.
Mostly because the feed they're getting is amplifying their own opinion, right? So we've got obviously like 3 or 4 different social things that we're all aware of. It's it's the feed is tailored to you, and a lot of anonymous people and you're gonna have a bias, affirmation bias, or the attribution bias. So you're gonna tend to cherry pick everything that you want to see, and that's been around for a long time, and it's starting to take root to where nobody knows the truth anymore unless you actively seek it. If you don't seek the truth, you're getting fed a bunch of bullshit that comported with some point of view that started you down that path, and it could have been a really rotten one. And nobody's in charge anymore. Like it's kind of scary. It's a little bit of it's brainwashing, and nobody's aware that they're being brainwashed, right? Like if you're good at it. So this isn't exactly the topic, but I think this is probably 70% of the problem is social media, the algorithm / like what Kyle said, which is lack of human consequence for your freedom of speech. Your freedom of speech should come with an accountability to defend it, or if you're going to offend somebody, that they might be able to offend you as well, and you might get a punch in the face. That's still not illegal either, but
I
you're never
think
going to get
technically the
punched in the
punch in the
face on
face is,
social
but it's
media.
warranted.
Right. Yeah, fair enough. But you know what I'm talking about. Like freedom of speech was never free of consequences, and now it is.
I find that interesting. A side topic. I don't know if you followed this, that there's been reports that big companies are firing people who made I'm going to assume that they were egregious posts in the aftermath of the assassination, and don't you bet that some of those people are surprised. And in fact, I've seen people saying, "Well, this is evidence of suppression of free speech," and
Wrong.
I don't agree. I don't agree. Like, you're totally free to say that, but your employer is totally free to say, "I don't want any part of you in my company, and I'm firing you." Free speech means we don't go to jail for
Right.
saying things. It
Right.
doesn't mean that you could safely walk out of a bar after telling a guy to go to hell, right? Like there's no guarantees
That's right.
of your free speech. It's a legal right. It doesn't eliminate
It's not a social
consequences.
right. And I do think there's been a translation error. Same with separation of church and state, and that's a whole nother episode, I'm sure. But yeah, like people's expectation of what it means to have all these rights in America, they're like, well, they come with responsibilities too. Part of that is, or and accountability. So, and we've removed some of the negative consequences of speaking your mind, and people do say some pretty nasty things when nobody keeps them in check.
Well, and we talked a bit last week about, was it last week? We talked about gun control.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about, because how do you prevent these awful shootings from taking place? And, Ken had a good point that, there's no one thing that's going to fix them all. But even if you did something, is that better than nothing? And hey, if you could reduce it by X%, well, reducing by X% is better than 0%. I guess my fear is, my fear, honestly, is that this violence intensifies. When I look at some of the developing countries around the world, or you look at Iraq, for instance, after the war in Iraq, and again, a whole other podcast episode about trying to get a Middle Eastern country to just become democratic out of the blue. But you had all these factions and they're fighting, and you have people walking into markets and blowing themselves up and killing 50 people at a time. I guess that's my fear, is America becomes that. Like, I go to Target and 50 people got blown up, or some crazy, like, I don't want to, I don't want, again, sound doom and gloom, but it could get a whole lot worse if people really wanted to start, taking this to the next level. And I guess where I was trying to go a little bit last week was like, I don't necessarily oppose gun control legislation that would help, but it's like, I'm more worried, like, how do you prevent the wackoness that gets to firing a gun or setting a bomb off or whatever crazy ass thing they're going to do? How do we rewind that clock? And you're not going to shut social media off. It's only going to get worse. I mean, I don't
Maybe,
see a way out
maybe
of this.
maybe the antidote for bad speech is more speech. That's a kind of a libertarian point of view that I really espouse. I'm not sure it's true anymore because the speech is so infected with all those other factors we talked about, like whether it's the algorithm and quite frankly, it's commercialist, like they're selling clicks and stuff. But I don't necessarily agree that it's going to get worse, Kyle. I think this might be an inflection point, and maybe discourse is just it. Discourse is already ugly. Look, if you look back at the first decade of our union, like there was a lot of really strong disagreements between some of the founding fathers. It was in nicer words than we use today, but they disagreed just as strongly. I think that maybe we're just trying to figure out the mechanics of it, and that we don't shut stuff down. We just figure it out as a society. As Kent said, we start at the individual level. We each take a responsibility to conduct ourselves properly. We teach our children to do that. And it might take a minute, but you're right. We're never going to shut it down. So maybe we need to learn how to engage with it properly.
One thing that strikes me is that issue by issue, we would wind up in sometimes among the three of us having four different viewpoints, right? Like we would certainly disagree about things, but I don't think any of the three of us is a candidate for the kind of insanity of political violence that we see. So here's the issue. Like, you guys aren't the ones I'm worried about. And what's the difference between sussing out the difference? This one, the assassin in the Kirk case, I don't remember his name and wouldn't say it if I did. It's a little bit terrifying because it doesn't look like somebody who'd been living in the woods like Ted Kaczynski for years, right? Like,
Yeah.
this was an honor roll student. This was a scholarship, an academic scholarship to college kind of student. I was just thinking about this as you were talking, Kurt. Like, so, like, how do you make sure people are in the safe from having to worry about them assassinating people club? Like, right, how do you promote people into that group? And honestly, most of the things that I would have listed, this kid qualified for. Parents are involved, good education. Like, yeah, like if I, in the abstract, if I were going to list, like, well, how do we prevent kids from getting this? Like, well, we stay involved with them as their family and we teach them values and we make sure that they get a good education so they've got a good opportunity in life. Wow.
Maybe he had a screw loose, or maybe it just shows you just how pernicious social media and in this case, I think online gaming. Like, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because I don't know a ton about it, but I don't think those were good influences in his life, and I think they dominated his life for the last
Yeah.
several years.
Could well,
Well,
I don't know.
and I do think too, the problem is I think a lot of young people today, and I don't know if it's a thing today or maybe it's just being young, but don't make the connection of how permanent death is. And I know it sounds stupid, but I've heard of kids that have killed themselves and like they didn't think, like, I don't know what their thought process was, but there's this kind of point of view that like doesn't relate how permanent death, the people that make these decisions, life-changing decisions at a very young age, sometimes they don't think about them in terms of perspective. And so I'm not saying this kid didn't think he was really killing Charlie Kirk, but at the same time, I do wonder at a certain youthful age, do they really understand the gravity of any decision they're making?
Well, that's an interesting point, and probably slightly off topic, but it brings up a question for me. When's the first time you saw a dead body? Probably Baba's funeral. Your
My great grandmother, 12 years old.
Okay.
Mhm.
Did it have an impact on you?
I mean,
Okay,
it was sad,
but
yeah.
like kids are not, they don't see as much death because everybody's living longer, everybody's healthier. Like, we don't have as many accidents. Like, there was an accident with my son's good friend recently, and it changes your perspective, like when somebody dies at a young age like that, and you're associated with it. So I think you have a good point, but maybe even just a few decades ago when we were growing up, like, life was a little more dangerous.
Yeah.
And you were a little more attuned with death, whether it was family members or friends or whatever. And you're right. I think we've been desensitized to it a little bit. And I don't just think it's from violent video games, because, well, those have been around since the 80s, and they've been saying bad things about those. But I think life is pretty sanitized. You don't see death. You're not confronted with it. But when you are, like, we had a kid who had cancer at the high school, and he went through a really hard struggle, and he was friends with everybody, and it changed everybody in that high school a little bit. Just because they, like, his struggle to stay alive and thrive was shared on social media, one of the good things that social media can do. And it impacted everybody in that school in a positive way and gave them a little perspective on just how valuable and how tentative, your life can be. Sorry, a little bit of a tangent, but I thought that it
And I
resonated
guess
with me.
Ken, I would pose it to you. So he expresses one angle, which could be a positive, next step. Does this become something that people talk about and is used for good, or does it go down the path of I saw this? I don't know if you saw there was an editorial in the Telegraph by Janet Daly. She's a journalist, and the title is "The American Dream is Ending in a Psychotic Breakdown." She's a Brit. Well, no, actually, I think she's American, but working for a British paper. But basically, making the point that you know this is the path forward for America because it's all just a twisted dream that people can live in freedom and cherish all their freedom of speech and all this stuff. That it's all going to go down the crapper. Or is it going to be positive? What do you think, Kent? Come on. I hope you say it's the positive side, but
I'm going to make a bet. This has actually come up in multiple conversations, and I would say more than, and again, I think we settled that me and my liberal friends aren't doing some celebration about this assassination. In fact, I would say more than anything, the kinds of conversations that I've had are, wow, are we really standing at the precipice of the abyss? Like, is this, and I do think we will absolutely remember this particular assassination. I think it's going to be foundational. My hope is that it will be a bit of a turning point where we push back, but it's sure not going to happen fast, and it's not going to happen seamlessly or painlessly. I'm choosing, literally choosing, to believe that our country has been to these brinks before and we've come through. We came to a brink at Fort Sumter and it fell apart, and we had a second American Revolution as the Civil War has been, I think, well described. But there are other alternatives. I think that, I mentioned 1968 at the top of this. That period from 1963 with John F. Kennedy's assassination by a single lone gunman unattached to anybody else, to Bobby Kennedy, to Martin Luther King, to Malcolm X, and political violence and assassination was a part of the fabric of the 1960s. You can't say that our disunity in this country right now has anything on the disunity in the country in the period 1968, 69, 70, 71, Kent State, for God's sake. And so
Agreed.
it looks bad, man. It looks bad. This week was bad. The week that the Minnesota legislator was shot was bad. And the way that we talk about people is bad. I'm not ready to say irredeemable, and I'm going to maintain hope that at some point we can. So here's an interesting hypothesis, maybe not a good one. I'm going to say that Watergate was in some ways the path back from that because the one thing you can't think about Watergate is that it wasn't the haves trying to pull one over on people. And I think that's a really pervasive issue in our government. And I think a lot of the division is exactly, if not engineered, it's certainly tolerated and embraced by those in power. I said on a previous episode, and I stand by, I think that my enemy is not Republicans in this country. My enemy is Russia. And all the energy that I spend thinking that Republicans are my enemy and not thinking about Russia being my enemy is a wasted effort, but it is very fruitful for those who would use me as a tool. I think it's going to be okay.
For what?
So what you're saying is the path out of this whole thing is Epstein.
Yeah. Honestly, I think there's something to that. Not that, but like
We could all come together when we realize they're all against us.
Honestly, Kurt, that's exactly what I'm saying. I think that's
Uh,
part of what happened with Watergate. Everybody's like, oh, those guys this, those guys this. Wait a minute. Those guys are all like, we're all pawns in this, right? If we're
Yeah.
draft age, they're shipping us off to Vietnam, not because we're trying to save democracy from the Russians, but because we didn't want to lose face. Like, people realize the
well, we,
shell of
we didn't
things.
want them taking over. Yeah, that was a mess. Let's be honest. But yeah, I don't disagree with you. That was a turning point. Like when it is time to throw the bums out, and they're all bums.
Yeah.
Let's replace them with some new bums. And and the culture did change. But it took a minute. And let's say the hippies of that generation are still in power in the legislature on the left side. And like, is that good or bad? I don't know, but they're still holding on to that.
The Democrats do
So
not have a monopoly on draft dodgers from the 60s. I will just point
Yeah,
that out.
exactly.
fair, no, fair enough, fair enough. So it did change. That was a turning point in our country, and it worked itself out. We have a different dynamic, and I think it's going to work itself out too. So I think I'm in agreement with you that you're kind of being positive on this, and that the big message everyone needs to get is that they're all lying to you, and it's not just the government at this point. It's your social media accounts. It's Russia, because they're influencing your social media accounts. And so remember who your enemy is and who your friends are, and learn to trust your fellow American.
Well, but if the stats are wrong, you just fire the administrator, right, Kent?
Exactly.
Oh, Bureau of
And
Labor Statistics.
yeah,
Gotcha. Did you guys review Trump's statement on the? I mean, yeah, Kent, sounds like you did. Kyle, did you watch it?
I think Kyle got it. Kyle quoted it. I made it up. So,
Yeah.
but it still didn't look great.
No, his words were actually great. Maybe you could take issue with that, but without naming my wife, I'm going to say she brought up an excellent point. She said, as the head of state, he sets the temperature, and he can try to cool it down now, but he warmed it up an awful lot with rhetoric. And I was just very impressed with that insight. And there's a lot of things we could say about the guy. I don't think he punches down as much as he punches across. Kent, I know you and I agree with you on the immigrant issue. He kind of picked on people below his station. But other than that, he mostly picks on people who have attacked him or threatened him, and who can defend themselves. So I understand, and sometimes have defended his orneriness as just basically, being self-defense. But as head of state, you got to realize you have a higher responsibility.
I draw a thread for myself, and I'm going to sound like a broken record on this, but my statement earlier about fixing this starts with me. One of the things that bothers me most about Trump is the othering of people, and I think that's really clear in the way that he talks about immigrants. I know that not everybody agrees, but you know, you can at least excerpt things that he's said that are, I think, are really disrespectful to people. And I think that the Democrats did this. I would put that in the same class.
The radical left lunatics. But yeah,
Right. Well,
it
and if
wasn't
he
Democrats,
meant radical left lunatics, really, like, okay, if this guy,
no, I'm just saying he didn't say Democrats. He said radical left lunatic. I don't think
Yeah.
you consider yourself a radical left lunatic. So I don't know
no,
that.
but he does, because he's used that exact label to talk about all kinds of things that are exactly in my wheelhouse. That's what I'm saying. Othering, period, it's a bad thing in a democracy. When you try to, like, you're painting people by their group,
Which is from the left.
Well, the left has
started on the left.
I don't know about started. The left has had
They own
its
it.
own problems with that. I agree.
And I understand the grievances. They are legitimate. But I don't think Donald Trump killed the discourse. I think he's the coroner.
I think there's some truth to that. And by the way, I also don't take part of my I'm the problem or whatever you want to call that label. I mean, I keep saying to my liberal friends that all of the things that and I literally do loathe Donald Trump and the things that he says, but on some level, like I was bitter about his first election. This election, what the hell? Like, can we not deal with the fact that Joe Biden, whom I admired as a man, Joe Biden's obstinate refusal to get the hell out of the way, that has a direct relationship to Trump being reelected. How I can't not look that in the eye.
Are we
Well,
having the wrong conversation, though? I mean, I guess I'm saying, though,
would Trump have won anyway? I don't know. Not without Charlie Kirk, probably. And that pisses a lot of people off. A lot of people who are like, man, this was a huge missed opportunity. And this guy, he makes no bones about what he believes. And I'm sure a lot of people saw that as like, man, we had this. If it weren't for him and if it weren't for Joe Biden and Trump, who's an asshole.
yeah, okay, but
So they see all
that's
these
not
reasons that they're.
It wasn't an organization that killed him. It was some guy that was pissed and had a grievance.
Well, yeah, but that's not what your average Democrat is probably critiquing. They're blaming Charlie Kirk or blaming Trump or blaming somebody else.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think people see this for what it is. Of course, there are examples, right? But I think by and large, people see this for what it is. I hope.
Well, I hope so too. I think there are a lot of people in on everything. And so even when it's just dumb circumstances like this or bad strategy, they don't see that. They see the other side is trying to eliminate me. And, and the fix is in and I'm going to level the playing field. And so you get these vigilantes out there.
But I guess where I'm at is I think you got a dumb kid that doesn't know what he's doing and did a horrible thing. I guess what I'm saying is it's like, I don't think this dude had the kind of geopolitical sense to think about, well, if we could eliminate this individual and blah, blah, blah. No, it's just some jerk with a grievance. Like this wasn't some sophisticated guy like scoping out the political scene. He's just some asshole that shot at somebody, and I guess I'm just saying like,
all right, that's an excellent point. Let me ask you, why did he think that he had station to take that grievance to that level? And that's the real question. I think on a social level is the narcissism maybe that we're developing. And, you can look at, I could go off on a little tangent here about, different cultures and their social pecking order and things like that. And you don't, like if you're in India, I mean, my God, with the caste system, you're not going to speak to somebody above your level. But as Americans, man, we think we are if the president said something rude to you, what would you do? You'd say, hey, screw you, because you're an American. You think you're the most important person on the planet. And we've developed that, which is probably a relatively healthy thing. And it's created a lot of productivity in our nation and all that and development and all that. But this is the downside of it, is we're telling everybody that your opinion is the most important opinion on the planet. And if somebody offends you, like they're not just wrong, like you don't have a right to be offended because you're that important. And if
That's
somebody's
basically
offended,
Janet Daly's point in her editorial. We have a society that
yeah,
is all entitled and everybody thinks they can do what they
narcissists.
want.
And we built it, you know.
Well, okay. I felt like we should have ended the podcast about a half hour ago because then we had Kent professing that everything was going to work out, and now we're back to the world is ending. So I don't know about this.
No,
Well,
we're a bunch of narcissists, and
in some ways,
we,
Kurt, I think that's maybe partly what's, ironically, that's sort of what's missing at this point. I think on the personal level, you're right. I think there are very few Americans who, if the president of the United States walked, yeah, I mean, we'd stand up and shake their hand, right? But I, I've often thought about that. If Trump came here and to our campus and spoke, and like I got it, I'd probably go, but I'd probably say, yeah, I think you're way off the mark with this or that. Like I wouldn't hesitate to that. But in a way,
If I may interrupt, Kent, I might point out that this is the same Kent who smoked a cigar with Steve Scalise.
no,
no, Scalia.
Scalia, I mean,
yeah,
yes.
Antonin
No, I'm
Scalia.
sorry. Sorry.
Yeah.
The wrong name.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But that's, I mean, it's like a bourbon and rum podcast. You know, I may think that he literally handed away America's soul with the Citizens United decision, but that's not a reason to not to have a cigar with a guy.
Sorry. No, sorry to interrupt you.
I think that what we need though is to recapture a little bit of that American hubris, and people realize that we do have agency in fixing this. And I don't mean that we pick up rifles and kill people that don't agree with us. We have agency by choosing to be civil, to choosing to stand up for our values, but in a respectful way.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, we got to take the best of a free society and nurture it, and some of the worst, which we're seeing now, and do our best to eliminate it without force, because that we don't want to go down that road. So,
Agree.
yeah, like the best of it is that station, that agency, that hubris. Like that. I feel empowered to say what I want, and some good ideas are going to emerge from that. A lot of bad ones too, but you're not going to get the good ones if you don't allow it. And so I'm more than ever committed to free speech. I think Charlie was annoying if you disagreed with him, but I do think he lived what he said, which was, civil discourse. I think he was civil, and I think he honed his arguments rather than shouting people down. And that might be why it struck me.
Yeah. Well, I think that may be exactly the note on which to end. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. Kurt, we're really grateful to have you on the podcast with us this week. It's been fun.
I appreciate it. I hope I didn't hijack it too much. I respect you guys both and your ability to, share ideas and not get irritated and talk over each other. And I'm honored. Thanks.
Well, I think it was a success. There were no F-bombs either. So we did great.
Our streak is unbroken.
Have to edit them out. Right.
That's right.
Hey, thanks for joining us on this episode of Bourbon and Rum Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Remember to subscribe on your favorite platform and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us keep the good spirits flowing.
And we invite you to join this conversation. Follow us on our Facebook page. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you want to hear.
And until next time, cheers.